motion, breathing, blinking, and temperature. The eye tracking equipment that we use from time to time is separate. So I talked about how we're measuring 20,000 times a second. We're looking at the baseline of an individual respondent, and we're taking the deltas in terms of the change that respondent is experiencing, and then we're aggregating that data across the total sample. And we do that for positive and negative emotion, and we do that for cognitive processing. And here's how you can see over the course of a commercial what the absolute shape might be in terms of the journey that the consumer is experiencing. But you'll see shortly that when we actually go into in-depth analysis of an individual commercial, we go scene by scene, and we correlate the actual metrics for that individual scene. So today we're going to talk about this commercial that Kelley talked about, what a great buzz it got in the industry. And the expectations were so high, and then there was the realization that the sales did not match the expectations, that the buzz didn't translate in this case. And there was a real desire to understand why.
Has progress taken us to a better place? I'd say it's taken us for a ride. Honestly, what thanks do we owe progress? We're up to our necks in landfill and down to the wire in resources, and climate change is out to get us. That's why progress plays no role inside post-shredded wheat. Here, we put the no in innovation. Post-original shredded wheat is still just the one simple, honest ingredient which naturally comes with vitamins, minerals, and fiber. All we did was make it spoon-sized. Did we go too far?
I know. On one level, it is such a charming, fun, cool commercial. But it didn't work for the brand the way it was supposed to. The good news that we'll ultimately get to very shortly is that in the testing and understanding, we were able to get the brand to where it needed to be. So the first thing we look at is engagement efficiency. And in this case, the ad was off to just a smooth sailing start. It engaged in 3.5 seconds, which is above our norm of 5 to 7 seconds on average, even though it's lower. That's good. So people engaged, just as you did, and got going with it. However,
what we found is very similar to people were engaged with the ad. You know, early on they were engaged, they were involved in the ad, they found it interesting, they found it unique. However, we'll go on to show you they didn't quite understand the whole creative premise. So they didn't understand everything, and it detracted from the ad really being very enjoyable. So enjoyment was below norm. Consumers didn't really get the connection to post-shredded wheat, so branding was also below norm. So what we found is the ability for the ad to break through was actually significantly below what we would typically see for other commercials.
Here, I talked about scene study analysis when we want to go deep into an ad and understand how consumers are engaging, what's causing them to think. So you see that early in the commercial, where has progress taken us to a better place? Then cognition drops off, and that cognition is usually at a resting state. It's not that you're brain dead, it's that you're just sort of idling along, and then something all of a sudden gets you to start working again. And so the work started to happen around the climate change, and again, here we put the no in innovation. Once that happened, by the time we got to the end of the commercial, where the real meat about what the brand stands for and the real benefit is to the consumer, there people were starting to think. We contrast that with the emotional response that people had in looking at this ad. And we see a couple of problem situations here. When you see positive cognition and really negative emotion, you have an inverse relationship where people are thinking really hard and not liking what they're thinking about. They're having a negative reaction. Usually this situation signals confusion or frustration. And this very nicely coalesced with the Millward Brown results from the standpoint that while everybody in this room happens to be really sophisticated, a lot of middle America perhaps didn't quite get the humor. So this became a tale of two ads, where on one level, if you got it, it was hilariously funny. but a lot of people really didn't get it. What people did get, however, was when you started to talk about all the good parts about this brand, that it's natural, that it's wholesome, and that it's got just one ingredient. And this said that this envelope was potentially upstaging the main message, and that the main message could stand on its own. Sometimes you don't have anything that interesting to say if you have a parody brand. But in this case, this was a brand that had a message that really engaged people both cognitively, because it was timely, as Kelley said, and emotionally.
So what we found is there was this paradox that, you know, in the industry, in the press, and of course everyone in this room understood the ad, but there were a lot of consumers who didn't quite understand the ad, and that really detracted from it being very enjoyable. Enjoyment was below norm, and it's not to say that there weren't elements people didn't like. There certainly were. You know, people definitely liked the clever, unique style. They liked the character of the CEO. They liked the simple, direct approach in some ways. But what they didn't really like so much was some people just found it boring. They didn't get it, so they found it boring. They couldn't really make the connection to the brand. And I love this quote where they talk about the whole commercial was boring and dull. It seemed like it was a commercial for a funeral home or a lawyer or something. So it just helps you understand that people just didn't really get that connection to post-shredded wheat. And in fact, the other thing we saw is because it moved into a new direction, it wasn't really using historical brand cues that it may have, you know, from before. So people really weren't getting any kind of connection to brand cues they'd seen before. And in addition, one of the things that Elissa showed you earlier on is that when the brand was introduced, it was at a point where there was actually a negative emotional reaction. And that's generally not the type of reaction that you want. What we really want is when the brand is introduced for people to be feeling really positive and be very cognitively engaged. So what we found is that it really just wasn't very well linked to post-shredded wheat. And in fact, without consumers understanding what was going on, communication also suffered in some ways. So in one way, it was good in that people really understood that basic idea of no progress. That came through shining crystal clear. Question was that positive or not? Because it really was kind of focusing around it hasn't changed, no innovation. So that could be a good thing, it could be a bad thing. Health nutrition was also coming through, so they got that general premise. But what they didn't get is the specificity around that health nutrition. They didn't really get necessarily natural at really strong levels. And that is one of the areas that consumers were cognitively engaged, emotionally engaged, what Elissa was talking about in terms of an area they really liked. So that wasn't coming through as strongly as it could have because it wasn't really the focus of the commercial. And then the other thing is they didn't really get the pure and simple to the element that we would have liked them to. So the communication wasn't coming through quite as strongly as we would have hoped on the key elements about the product.
This is an EmSense metric, but it really has nothing to do with neuroscience. Has to do with our belief in merging survey response as well as neuroscience. And so what we typically do when we show ads within a clutter reel, we re-expose the ad after we've gotten all of the biosensory metrics, and we'll ask people simply, what were you thinking and feeling as you saw this ad? And we could see very clearly from this diagnostic that old, serial, business, boring, was not the message that we really wanted this brand to be conveying to its target, although there was the people that understood that it really was funny. But the funny didn't translate to what we might have wanted to see in terms of healthy and wholesome and good for you kinds of messaging. The other thing that's really important is how does the brand come across emotionally once it's put inside this kind of creative envelope? And what we saw was that when the commercial was showing the brand or mentioning the brand name, there was a negative emotional response within that creative kind of jokey setup. When the brand was mentioned paired with its benefits, which naturally comes with vitamins and fiber, one honest ingredient, there was a very strong positive visceral response. And that also fueled our conclusions and recommendations coming out of the study with respect to where you can take this brand and potentially leave some of this other envelope behind. I just also want to mention that with the ability to look at subgroup analysis, and we're really one of the only neuroscience companies that use this kind of quantity of samples so that you can get into, in this case we looked at users and non-users, and you can look at where there might be differences. You can do the same with really any subgroup if you just build it from the bottom up.
So what we found is that without consumers taking out the key benefits about the brand, the message to them wasn't highly relevant. And therefore, it didn't really motivate them to go buy post-shredded wheat at the store. And we found that what was even more concerning about that is we found that that was low for both users and non-users. So not only we were not pulling in new users, but the current users weren't being encouraged to go out and try the brand. So where did this all net out?
When I think and relive this now, about what, a year and a half, 2 years later, it's interesting to see the journey. And I have to say, I don't think we would have been able to get to this level of learning without having worked with Elissa and with Mitzi. You know, as Elissa mentioned, you know, what we took away was that the ad truly had upstaged the brand and the product in all of this, and that, you know, while it was great that the industry and we were getting all of these accolades for it, at the end of the day, the average Joe and Jane didn't want to work that hard to figure out why they should buy or care buy post-shredded wheat. I mean, it was that clear. And so we went back and we retooled and really took these insights that were gleaned from this research to lay the foundation for where we were going to go in the future. And that was really focusing more on our true product benefits. You know, we picked ourselves up, dusted ourselves off, and just really moved forward with it. And we also did an emotive segmentation study to really understand those true drivers for this consumer segment. And we found out through that work that they were really information seekers. They wanted to know the facts. They wanted to know the figures. They wanted to have that kind of content so that they know when they were making the decision, it was them making the decision. They weren't being told to do it. They were making an informed choice. And so we retooled even the vehicles that we were using. We went out more with print and PR and utilized digital in a different way and leveraged our packaging more, calling out our natural advantage, really focusing on the product integrity and our honest ingredients that we have. The natural whole grains, the natural fiber, the natural antioxidants that you get from this cereal, and talking to them of why that's important on the back panel. As many of you cereal eaters out there probably know, you sit at the table and you look at the back of the box. It's a fabulous way to convey information, and we leveraged it to the best of our abilities here. So with the post-shredded wheat and the natural advantage campaign, you know, in Q4, we launched this in Q4, and we had 8 million media impressions, and then year to date, we have close to 20 million media impressions. We're getting picked up on its own now, the product, not the advertising, in terms of on shows like Reed and Kelley, on the Today Show, during the Olympics, in Prevention magazine, and so forth. So the shift is really different. Before they were talking about the advertising and the creative envelope. Now they're talking about the brand and its healthfulness and its product benefits, which is a great reinforcement of the brand boost that we're getting here. And then let's go back to the original situation that we had. The sales weren't where they needed to be. As a result of this work and really focusing not just our communications to be more focused and direct, we also took that to in-store, making sure taking not only just this packaging and some of the in-store interruption things that we could do and our trade dollars, we have seen that this business has turned around and is on a positive outlook going forward. So, thank you, ladies. Thank you. We have one more slide.
Oh, one more slide.
That's right, you do.
Well, we just want to say, I mean, hopefully today we showcased to you really the power of using state-of-the-art tools like link copy testing and EmSense brainwave measurement together. We really think that it gives you new routes to ad optimization, and we're very happy to be partnering together.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.